third and last speaker of this session is Professor Amir Gilan. He's a professor of Hittite and Anatolian studies, so we're staying more or less some of the same geographic areas. Hittite and Anatolian studies in the Department of Archaeology and Ancient Near Eastern Cultures in Tel Aviv University. His research focuses on political, religious, literary, and cultural history of ancient Anatolia, especially in the second millennium. And today we will hear about a new look at the literature concerning the kings of Akkad in Hittite Anatolia.
Thank you so much for the kind invitation, dear Professor Klein, most distinguished guests, colleagues and friends. Dear organizers, thank you for the invitation, and sorry that I wasn't being able to participate in the conference yesterday. While we talk about the magnificent book we are celebrating, a question many of my students have been asking this: is there going to be a reprint of the book? Because it's nowhere to be bought, so maybe we could use this conference in trying to make Amoved, making a new edition of it, because it's... Okay. My talk will focus on another hero that went west, Sargon, the legendary king of Akkad, and survey his appearances in Hittite texts. The title of the talk, A New Look, is a little bit misleading. Some of the stuff that I will show are not so new. Some of them are coming from Guterbock's groundbreaking dissertation from '38. And some of them are coming from my MA thesis. I was just talking about this with Professor Maul, which I wrote in Berlin under the supervision of Professor Volkert Haas, who died a few years ago, and Professor Johannes Renger, who died a few weeks ago. We encountered Sargon already. We encountered Sargon already at the very dawn of Hittite history in the many deeds of King Hattusili I, the founder of the old Hittite kingdom, even if in later modernized empire period copies. So we don't know how old is this insertion. In its concluding paragraph, which summarized the destruction of the important cities of Chachum and Chashum, Hattusili compares his own deeds with those of the Akkadian king Sargon, who had lived more than half a millennium earlier. The text states that Hattusili followed Sargon's unique achievement and crossed the Euphrates on foot, but whereas the Akkadian king failed to destroy the city of Chachum, his Hittite counterparts destroyed both it and Chashum. This literary reference discloses familiarity with the literary traditions about the legendary kings of Akkad, and we heard about the school, the scribal school curriculum earlier. These compositions circulated in the cuneiform centers of the ancient Near East and were available to Hittite scholars in Akkadian as well as in Hittite adaptations. It is reasonable to assume that the scribe that authored the many deeds learned about Sargon through the stream of tradition concerning the Akkadian kings, even if the exact waterbed that this particular stream took remains a mystery to this day. The city of Chachum is mentioned in other compositions concerning the Akkadian kings. Moreover, Hattusili did not only compare himself to Sargon, he apparently engaged in direct dialogue with him, responding to the famous challenge taken from one of the old Babylonian compositions about his ruler, cited by Westenholz: "Know the king who wants to equal me, where I have gone, let him also go." Thus, the author of the composition was well acquainted with the Sargonic law and understood its historical and literary significance. So was presumably the audience of the composition as well, of the Hittite manly deeds. The earliest manuscript of texts that genuinely belong to the Sargonic tradition are dated to the 15th century BCE. These are library prisms written in Akkadian of the Cutian legend of Naram Sin. The colophon on one of the prisms states that it was written by Chaniquili, son of the Babylonian scribe Anushar Ilani, who resided in Hattusa in the 15th century and founded an illustrious scribal family there, meticulously studied by Shai Gordin, who I see somewhere at the back. Several other compositions concerning the Akkadian kings were found in Hittite translation or adaptations in the archives and libraries of Hattusa. One composition in Hittite is Hittite translation concerning Naram-Sin's victory over a coalition of rebellious kings. The composition, the so-called Great Revolt against Naram-Sin, is known in different versions, edited by Westenholz in her book. Several of these are Old Babylonian recessions, which were shown to be adaptations of an old Akkadian description. All these versions contain a detailed catalogue of enemy kings, but in each version, these lists of adversaries differ somewhat and seem to be representing a different geographical horizon. The Hittite version is unfortunately quite fragmentary, but its best preserved part contains a detailed list of 17 kings who rose against Naram-Sin, only to be defeated by him. A parallel catalogue of these kings is found in one of the old Babylonian manuscripts, probably originating from Sipar, and this was compared by many scholars. It was published by Westenholz as Gilan and the 17 Kings against Naram-Sin. A close comparison of the two lists revealed that the Hittite version has more Anatolian rulers than its parallel from Sipar. An otherwise unknown king of Hattusa by the name of Pamba is mentioned exclusively in the Hittite version and is missing from the Old Babylonian parallel. Another exclusive feature of the Hittite list is the appearance of the broken name Nur Dagan, which sounds which should be restored as Nur Dagan, king of Purushkhanda, known from another Sargonic literature, the king of Bethel, the Shartamchari. As already observed by Guterbock, in Hittite adaptations of narratives concerning the old Akkadian kings, Sargon and Naram-Sin face and defeat more Anatolian rulers than they do in Mesopotamian versions of the same stories. Thus, Hittite scholars, scribes, to use Theo van den Hout's term, were clearly interested in setting the famous stories concerning Sargon and Naram-Sin in Anatolian setting, involving Anatolian kings as adversaries and Anatolia towns as targets. The Hittite literature concerning the old Akkadian kings provided therefore a platform for exploring notions of a past, a distant past, otherwise unknown to the Hittite scholars, and integrating Anatolia into a grand narrative of an ancient past, the grand Mesopotamian narrative of the ancient past. One of the Hittite versions of the King of Bethel may even bear traces of deliberate manipulation aimed at achieving a more archaic appearance. The King of Bethel narrates Sargon's conquest of the Anatolian city of Purushkhanda. The uniqueness and boldness of this venture are the central theme of the composition. Several fragments representing slightly different versions of the story in Hittite adaptation were found in Hattusa. All of the manuscripts were copied in the Empire period. The better preserved manuscript of the composition, KBO 22-6, dating to the Empire period, was found in Temple 1. Smaller fragments originate from the house on the slope. The fine spot of the three other fragments is unknown. Another version of the composition, written in Akkadian and discovered in Tel al-Amarna in Egypt, that's the famous Chartamchari version, is possibly based on a Syro-Hurrian or Hittite tradition. Both the Amarna version and the Hittite composition are roughly dating to the same time. The Amarna text to the 14th century. The Hittite composition could be slightly earlier. It is dated by Riken to the 15th century BCE, but it's not earlier than that. In recent years, a few tiny joints were identified by several scholars, most notably August Soisal in his publication of the bow fragments from Istanbul. The content of the Hittite version will be summarized shortly as follows. The text begins with a set of epitaphs, followed by a lengthy dialogue between Sargon and his reluctant warriors concerning a campaign suggested by merchants. The subject of the dialogue is the distance and difficulties of such a campaign. Sargon is determined to go to war and promises his reluctant warrior victories based on the advice of the goddess Ishtar, written strangely in the Hittite text as Ishtar Li, which we now know to be the goddess Ancili, which was revealed to him in the dream during incubation. And this is, by the way, one of the unsolved mysteries of Hittite literature and religion. Why did Ishtar become Ancili? Ancili is a minor deity which has to do with birth and with streams and has Chatian origin and appears in birth rituals, and there is actually no reason whatsoever why they would do this equation, unless of course it's wrong, unless of course they mean something else. And this is something that I would like to say in a more general way. This shows how little did the Hittite scribes understood actually the playfulness of the composition, because there's a lot of playful word games with Ishtar, and Ishtar being so important for Sargon, and all this goes lost if you just put Ancili in it. But this is something that needs to be analyzed in detail someplace else. The composition then briefly describes the army crossing of the holy Tigris River, not the Euphrates, and the sacrifices involved. The scene of action then moves to the city of Purushkhanda. The god Enlil, again, it's not so clear what the Hittite scribe, scholar understood by Enlil, appears in a dream to the king of Purushkhanda, written Nurdachi, wrong in the main Hittite fragment, and warns him of Sargon intentions and reassures him that he will be safe. Of course, this is a trap. Column 2 and 3 are fragmentary. I will not go into a lot of details, but they depict the confrontation between and the dialogues between Sargon and the Purushkhandian king. The beginning of the better preserved fourth column relates the scene of Nurdachi's surrender to Sargon. A new episode opens as Sargon is said to leave Purushkhanda after a long stay. The warriors protest that they should not leave empty-handed. They request permission to cut 3 types of trees that stand at the gatehouse for different purposes, including an image of Sargon that would be set up at the gate. Sargon fulfills their wishes. It is not known whether the image was actually made because the text breaks off at this point. Several important differences between the Old Babylonian forerunners and the king of battle are easily noticed. New story elements are added, notably the appearance of the merchant in a symmetrical double dialogue. The most striking difference is, however, the destination of Sargon's campaign. In the 2 Old Babylonian texts, his target is the northeastern Shimurum. In the Shat-Amchar, he is marching against the western Anatolian city of Purushkhanda. The difference is not only geographical. While the military actions in the region of Shimurum are documented in year dates of the Akkadian king, Purushkhanda is, to my knowledge, at least not yet attested in old Akkadian sources. Many scholars have therefore searched for a new historical context that might account for the appearance of these new story elements. The Old Assyrian period presents itself as an attractive candidate due to the appearance of the merchants and of Purushkhanda in the story. The most articulate proponent of this reconstruction is Mario Liverani, who suggested in an article in his 1993 book, Akkad, the First World Empire, that the composition originated against the background of debates on the resumption of trade in Anatolia during the reign of Shamshi-Adu. However, as already noted by many scholars, it is hard to believe that the highly profitable commercial enterprise in Anatolia needed any justification in the form of literary fiction. If I'm not mistaken, it was Hermann Venstipaut who was the first to suggest in the Istanbul Rencontre volume that the appearance of the new story element of Purushkhanda and of the merchants in the Sargonic tradition may have something to do with the rise of Hittite hegemony in the period where these story elements were added. But could it suggest Hittite authorship or reduction as well? Did the Hittite scribe deleted Shimurum and inserted Purushkhanda instead in order to make the story interesting to a Hittite audience or relevant to a Hittite audience, as did the author of the Naram Sin text, inserting a king Pamba of Hattusa as shown above? Several Hittitologists have gone down that road, mistakenly, suggesting that the appearance of Purushkhanda instead of Shimurum was not inspired by the importance of Purushkhanda in the Old Assyrian period, but rather by the fact that Purushkhanda was a major rival of the Old Hittite kingdom at the dawn of Hittite history. However, like so many other major states of the Old Assyrian period, in Anatolia, Purushkhanda lost its significance after the Old Hittite period and probably ceased to exist shortly after that. So when the Shat-Amchari was translated, the city was no longer existing. In Empire sources, the town has a minor role in several festival texts. In the Empire period prayer of Muatali to the Assembly of Gods, it is mentioned as a cult place of a storm god. The political history of the town is also reflected in the spelling of its name. Purush Chanda is well attested in Old Hittite sources, mostly, however, from the Old Hittite period. The name is spelled Purush Chanda in Old Hittite text, but Parsu Chanda in the Telepinu text a bit later, and Parsu Chunta in later Middle Hittite text. It is spelled Par-Arshu Chanta in the prayer of Muatali. The spelling in the Hittite version of the Shar Tamchar is evidently Old Hittite, freezing the Old Hittite spelling of the name. Roughly contemporary sources of the time of its composition such as the Telepinu text, already show later spellings, and the fact that the city was lost, or it was no longer in existence. The main obstacle to a Hittite authorship hypothesis of the Purush Chanda story is, of course, the skull tablet found in controlled excavation in Ur, but the field number is lost. You can see it here in the edition of Westenholz. It was published by Gurney and was fully edited by Westenholz in her Legends of the Kings of Akkad. The beginning of the text, which was defined as an unfinished practice tablet by Gurney, contains a fictive letter from Sargon about conquering Purush Chanda, addressed to 8 individuals. The rest of the tablet contains a very long list of professions and objects. The city is interestingly written in the Old Hittite fashion, Purush Chanda, which is also preserved in later Mesopotamian sources. The spelling Purush Chantar is found in the Kutian legend of Nahum Sin. The city is named Bursha Chanda in the Amarna text and in the Babylonian map of the world. The Old Assyrian text, the city is written Burush Khatum, which shows that the Old Assyrian period or merchants was not the channel of transmission. The Ur scribal exercise shows that the composition attributing the conquest of Purush Chanda to Sargon was known in Ur and therefore certainly Mesopotamian in origin. The Old Anatolian spelling Purush Chanda in the scribal exercise in Ur may also attest the antiquity of the composition. In recent studies on Anatolian geography of the Old Assyrian period, Gojko Baroyamovich has shown that Purush Chanda should be located much further to the west as previously suspected. In another study, he argues that Purush Chanda constituted the western limit of the Assyrian trade network and that it functioned as a major getaway from where goods left Assyrian hands, and passed on to other merchants on their way to the Balkan and to the west, to the Aegean world. Recent excavation at Kultepe, ancient Karnesh, revealed that the city, you can see Purush Chanda, recent excavation at Kultepe, ancient Karnesh, revealed that the city was a major international hub already in the early Bronze Age, well connected with Western Anatolia, Syria, northern and southern Mesopotamia of the old Akkadian Empire. The city of Purush Chanda may have thus signified the western end of the world. As many scholars have already suggested, Shimurum and Macharashi of the Old Babylonian text were exchangeable with Purush Chanda because they have the same literary role to represent the end of the known world in different directions. Another scene which may have been a Churo-Hittite innovation is the offering scene on the Tigris, on the river Tigris, Aranzach. The sacrifices on the Tigris are not known from any other text concerning the Akkadian kings. In the King of Battle, 1 bull and 7 sheep were sacrificed to the holy Aranzach. A somewhat similar relation is kept in the Sargon Kultepe text. There, Sargon slaughters 1,000 oxen and 6,000 sheep daily to feed his army. The main question here is, why did Sargon cross the Tigris instead of the Euphrates? A probable explanation is offered again by Van Stiphout, suggesting that the crossing of the Tigris belonged to an older version of the narrative. As we have seen, the destination of Sargon campaign shifted from Shimurum to Purush Chanda. In order to reach Shimurum, one has to cross the Tigris. However, a crossing of the Tigris is not yet mentioned in the Old Babylonian versions. There's mention of sacrifices after Sargon crossed the Amanos range and reached the cedar forest. The purification of the army without a river is described in the Old Babylonian Louvre text. According to the manly deeds of Hattusili, mentioned above, Sargon crossed the Euphrates River in order to reach northern Syria. The Aranza River, however, was a major entity in Syrian Hittite mythology. The river Tigris, as we are instructed in terminological composition known as the Song of Emergence, is the brother of Teshub and probably also of Ancili, Ishtar. His mother was Kumarbi. The crossing and sacrifices by Sargon to the Aranza River may have been meaningful to a Hittite scholar scribe. On the other hand, in one of the tales of 1001 Nights, depicting the nocturne adventures of the Caliph, the city of Baghdad is depicted as being on the banks of the Euphrates River, simply a copyist mistake, so this could be just a simple mistake. The Mesopotamian kings also took part in Hittite rituals, and this is actually the most interesting part, perhaps. The most well-known example is a text by the name KUB 2738, Middle Hittite ritual text that embeds list of historical kings in ritual setting. The first part of the text contains a Hurrian song prescribed to be sung during the production of wool puppets that were designed to function as substitute for kings. Various deified rulers are summoned, among them Atal Shen, known ruler of Urkesh and Navarre. Later, mountains, including Chalci and Nani, the abodes of the storm god, and various rivers are mentioned. Subject of the second part is another song concerning the circle of deities around Chebat, Teshub, and Sharuma. The partly broken third part contains, again, a list of various ancient Near Eastern rulers, among them the old Akkadian kings Sargon, Manishtushu, Naram-Sin, Sharkalishari, and other royals as well, king of Elam and others, and also deities such as Kumarbi and his mythological offspring Chedamu, the sea monster created by Kumarbi to fight Teshub. And again, this is the same background, the same literary religious background, the Hittite narratives, the Sargon myth, they all come probably from the same area. This is not the only ritual text that evokes the old Akkadian kings. There is also fragmentary evidence that some of these ancient kings were summoned in incantation rituals. As you can see, the evidence is very fragmentary. Not much is left of the text, KUB 48.112, a ritual by the old woman, and what is left was already known to Guterborg in his dissertation. Significantly, the two pieces seem to represent the upper part of the first column and the lower part of the fourth column, thus beginning and ending the composition respectively. In what is left of the first column, we find an invocation of Ishtar of Nineveh, mentioning also Nenata, one of her ladies in waiting. The fourth column is broken, but it contains the last magic speech act of the ritual, saying something like, just as someone in Aram-Sin came, also to me something will be, or something like that. It is, of course, tempting to amend Sargon before Naram-Sin at the end of line 2. In this context, the mysterious final words in another ritual by an old woman, also from Kizuvatna, of Mashtiga ritual for domestic quarrel, came to mind, here translated by Jared Miller, and I will read only the second part. And further, they pour the water into the horn of a bull. The two ritual patrons cover it over, and the old woman speaks thus. When the ancient king return, or come back and concern themselves with the land and customs, only then shall the seal be broken. The exact meaning of Mashtiga's saying has been widely debated. Are the ancient kings ever coming back or not? Regardless of that, scholars often suggested that the ancient kings alluded to in this passage were the kings of Akkad. The fragmentary Munusugi ritual, the old woman, KUB 48.12, we've just seen, contains a last speech act, mentioning the arrival of Sargon and Naram-Sin. It lends further support to this theory. The question that arises from all this, and this is something that we will have to discuss in another context, is what does it say about the literature about the Akkadian kings? Were the names of Sargon and Naram-Sin household names because we've seen that patients, there was speech acts of ritualists curing with that, or those rituals were written, and this is what I think is more probable, in the scribal school by scholar scribes themselves. And so we're just contained into this scribal school context. This is for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amir, for this fascinating talk. We do have some time for one or two questions, comments, or complaints. Yes.
How much do we currently understand the Akkadian colonial networks work in Anatolia according to the written text in the textual point of view?
The old Akkadian.
For instance, how the scribal traditions or texts, how they spread into Anatolia? Do we have what's the current understanding?
You mean the texts, not the network, not the commercial network.
Are they connected in some way?
Well, about the scribal schools in Hattusa, we don't know exactly how they functioned. When do they start? I refer you to Shai's book. We don't have that much evidence, like we have in Old Babylonian times, about how the scribal school were functioning, what exactly were they reading. And we also don't know where those compositions come from. I have a guess, but it doesn't count too much. Regarding the network, the old Akkadian network, the third millennium network, well, of course, again, we don't know how it functioned, but we do have evidence for these commercial networks. In the third millennium, we also have seals and bulli from the old Akkadian kings that were found in Kultepe. So we know that there were contacts. Yeah. So we can imagine, and this was the idea, that in Mesopotamian scholars or scribes would know Purush Chanda even before the old Assyrian colony period, or even or parallel to it, because if they knew it by the old Assyrian merchants, they would call it Purush Chatu, not Purush Chanda, not the old Hittite name, which is very significant. And but again, when does it happen? We don't know. I don't think that there's evidence that Sargon ever went that far west, but they could have imagined it. Yeah? I hope it answers this. But
if we don't have any further questions, we have some announcements before we can do this, right? Thank you very much, Amir.
The speakers are invited to lunch in the same place we've been yesterday. All the rest